Welcome. This is SLiTHER number 23, and today we are delighted to have Doctors Kari Stone and Sarah Shaner, who are going to be presenting, and of course there'll be plenty of time for discussion. We're really looking forward to hearing from you as well. Before we get going, I just want to say two things. One is that SLiTHERs have been a really fun thing for us, and we've made 23 of them now, including today. I'm going to put in the chat the link to our collection on Ionic Viper. You can go back and look at the previous ones. They are posted on YouTube after we're done. So if for anyone who misses this or has to leave early, the recording for this will also be posted on YouTube and posted in that collection once we get the video and process it. Anyway, again, we're really excited about today's presentation, and with that, I will turn it over to our speakers today. Oh, one other thing, sorry. There is and I'm saying this to remind myself as well, is there is going to be a quick survey that I'll post at the end, so please make sure you fill that out at the end. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Kyle. Kari and I are excited to talk to everyone about strategies to pre-assess first-year STEM students. So just as like an outline, because we're going to do things a little bit different than some of the SLiTHERs, I'm going to give an overview of just like pre-assessing students, the how, the why, what to do with that information. And then we're going to insert a little community discussion kind of in the middle here. And then Kari's going to tell you about some things that we've tried. We're at different institutions now, but we were previously at the same institution. So we're going to tell you about what we learned from that experience. And then we're going to have more community discussion. So that's kind of where we're going with this. So why might you want to pre-assess your first year STEM students? We all spend a lot of time and energy trying to teach them in general chemistry, and we want our students to succeed. So that's kind of the main reason, right? And we might want to pre-assess them for different reasons. We might want to try to assess their preparedness for some skills that we think they need to have for general chemistry. That might be previous chemistry knowledge, but I think usually if you look at like Facebook teaching groups for chemistry, people are concerned about math skills. That seems to be like a big, thing that people want to know what students have, what math skills that they have coming in. And the idea here is that we want to be able to know where students are coming from and meet them where they're coming from, and then offer appropriate course placement and support to help them succeed in whatever their goals are, and to get, basically to help them reach their goals. And the overall goal would also be to increase success in these first year chemistry courses, reduce the DFW rates. We like to think about these as being like Gen Chem as being like the first barrier that a lot of STEM students interact with or, bump up against. And so it's kind of a barrier class, but also it's when students are early in their college careers, so they may not have a lot of experience. And so it's important that a good outcome could build their self-confidence, and poor outcomes could affect their GPA and their scholarships and things like that. And one thing that we think that a lot of people don't always focus on is not just like, do they get a STEM degree, but do they graduate in general? I mean, obviously institutions think that's important, and maybe we need to focus on that as well. So we probably, most of you have seen some kind of graphic like this where we know our students are, or we're looking at the difference between like reality, equality, equity, and justice. We know our students come in with we all have different student bodies that we deal with, but they have different backgrounds and strengths and weaknesses and challenges and preparedness. And if we don't do anything, they're going to have really different outcomes. Probably the least we can do is to have equality where we treat everyone, the same, and we have certain support for our classes, maybe like tutoring or office hours, but we know even with that, the students aren't gonna all have the same outcomes. So I think where we need to try to reach is for this equity, where if we can identify students and know where they are, either formally or informally, then we can provide the appropriate supportive framework. And, ultimately we may want to get into this justice area, but as far as like an instructor or a department or an institution for our chemistry classes, we're kind of focused on this right now. So as far as this is kind of a table with some things about ways we've heard or we know that places identify or pre-assess students over here on the left, and on the right are some interventions that I'll get to in a minute. students come when they apply, they give us certain information. They may or may not give ACT or SAT scores. That's something that's changing. So we may want to use that information, or maybe just the math ACT score alone to try to glean which students are going to struggle in Gen Chem. We probably also know their high school GPA and whether they've taken high school chemistry before. So that's information that we kind of have at our hand. We may identify underprepared students by whether they meet course prerequisites, like do they have the right math class? That's kind of like, usually that's what it is, right? We're kind of saying the math department is going to pre-assess the students, and we're going to use that to figure out whether they're ready for Gen Chem. A lot of places have their own placement exams, or using the Toledo placement exam. So these could be online or in person. Some schools use performance on the first exam in general chemistry, and some schools don't do anything. So hopefully you can kind of think maybe there's some other things that we missed here. So if you think of anything, let us know. We're going to have a discussion here in just a second. So we have some of this information, whether we want it or not, probably. And, we may do something with it or we may not. A lot of places may take some of this information, and just as long as the students meet the prerequisites, they just proceed into general chemistry. There are certain, there's office hours, there's often tutoring, there's support available, but we're not providing it differentially to these students who may need it the most. And so hopefully there's lots of different ways to do this, but if we provide a more supportive framework, we can take whatever information that we have here, and we can apply whatever interventions we think we may want to do. So there's different interventions that different schools do. Sometimes students take general chemistry, but they have like an additional problem solving or some other extra support, maybe take an online prep course before starting Gen Chem, or take some additional class before Gen Chem, either like a survey chemistry class or a specifically prep Gen Chem class. Maybe there's some kind of summer bridge program or some other enhancement. If you guys have tried other things, we'd love to hear about them. And so, all of these things are going to be institutionally specific, like what can you get buy-in for? What do you have time and money and all these things for? So basically, we're kind of arguing that, it'd be good to identify who's going to need help depending on, with one of these methods, and then apply some intervention that, actually helps the student. So, we're kind of, obviously this opens up a lot of challenges, considerations, maybe opportunities. So we were just thinking maybe we could sort of let everyone, say what they've done or what they would like to try. I'm going to stop sharing, and Kari's going to actually open a whiteboard, and we're going to kind of keep track of what people have tried.
Yeah. So we're going to take about 10 minutes to talk about things that you've done, things that may work at your institution. What are the challenges? Just brainstorming, challenges that you have, struggles that you have at your own institutions. And I'm going to let Sarah lead the discussion, and I'm just going to turn off my video and share a whiteboard.
Yeah, so we started to open up, like on the Viper Discord, the Viper Pit, we sort of got some feedback from some people, and it seemed like a lot of people had tried things and then kind of gone away from them or tried different things throughout. So I don't know, does anyone, you can also throw it in the chat if you don't have a microphone or whatever, but is there anything that we didn't mention or that we have mentioned that you've tried?
So I have a math and chapter 1 Alex module that they do during the first week when they can still withdraw and get their money back. And then we hold some seats in the chem prep course for that. So it's mostly focused on math. So we've done some assessments and we find that more than chemistry, it's really the math. I've kind of pushed for having a higher math prereq, but then that delays people's progress. So there's a little pushback against that too. And they can be successful with lower math if they have other things going on, right? So
what is your math
one thing
prereq?
we do. Yeah, so we kind of say if you really struggle with this math module, then consider stopping doing math or taking the chem prep course instead and then coming back. Yeah.
I think people might agree with that. Yeah. So is there anyone in the prep class before you populate it, or is it sort of just a holding spot?
Yeah, so we have a late start. So it's like, I think it's 13 weeks instead of our 16-week semester. And then we kind of like save maybe 4 or 5 seats in that. So we don't allow enrollment. And then we kind of wait until the first week of Gen Chem goes. And then we see if there's anybody. Yeah, it's kind of tricky because then sometimes it's the students who are a little conservative and maybe they could have made it.
Right.
And then we have the ones that are like, it was hard, but I think I can push through, and totally unrealistic. So it's hard for the students to know. And that's basically what we're asking them to make that judgment.
Yeah, it is really hard.
Yeah.
There's some things in the chat. While I'm reading them, does anyone else have any?
So we also have kind of a pre-calc minimum, and many students are taking calculus anyways. So they have a math assessment they have to take, but we also have made a chemistry assessment. And we don't have we don't currently have a pre-Gen Chem class. We just use a more intensive time class. So if students place lower on the chem placement, then they go into that other class. And so I see in the chat, someone mentions using the Toledo exam. I think before my time, our school used that like on the first day, and it was giant chaos as everybody took the exam and like got their scores and had to switch classes and stuff.
Yeah, I think the timing of some of those placement exams are challenging.
Great question. Abby, I don't know. I'd have to go look at the data. That's another thing that I think is important, is like figuring out, like, once you try something, how do you assess it to see if it's actually working or not? And how long do you wait to do that assessment? Or do you keep changing things?
Definitely. Britt, were your students successful, the ones that fall back?
Usually, I think some of them I've talked to and they've said like, I maybe didn't really need it, but it gave me more confidence. I maybe could have pushed through. And some of them are like, no, I definitely needed that. Sometimes it's also like lab skills, like they've never really had a lab or had to do a notebook. So they get a little bit of that. But we have, I think I mentioned this already, but I'll just say it again, that we've done some studies with institutional research on success rates, and it seems definitely much more the math than the chemistry class is the big one. Yeah.
We tried a pre-Chem 1 class where they had to take, the Toledo assessment, the first quiz section, which is the first week, and they could voluntarily move into the pre-session, but we had mixed results and we didn't feel like it was necessarily populating that class with those who really needed it. Plus it put those students a semester behind, which created all kinds of domino effects. So this, after a couple of years off, this summer, they were sent, all incoming students from the orientation people, a letter from us with a test that we created with the answers, like, okay, decide if you need more help. And as part of the orientation, they had the option to take a second summer session course. And so that's going on right now. So I don't know yet how that's going to play out, but the idea of being able to capture students who need the math, the problem solving, some chemistry before Chem 1, we're hoping that maybe we're going to capture some of those and improve the DFW rate.
Yeah, it sounds like that's like a thing where we try certain things and then sort of keep looping around. Yeah, I think
Exactly.
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's exactly what we've been doing, is trying different things to address.
Yeah, Abby asked in the chat, asked Kyle if Kyle about if whether some of these placement things led to more marginalized students and higher percentages in these courses. So I think there's definitely some considerations around that, right? Like, is there stigma attached with like these different supports and different things like that? Are we being inclusive? How do we approach that? So I think that's definitely part of the conversation.
I was going to add, this is Dean Johnston. We had pretty extensive discussions about these things I think it was when we made a quarter to semester transition. We had a lot of really good ideas about sounds similar to what Kyle was talking about, where we would have the regular class, but then like an extra sort of support module that students would take who needed it. But then when it came down to how do you decide who needs that, right? Because if it's self-selection, that doesn't always work well because students aren't always, you'll get students who don't really need it in there, or students, so how do you have equity and accurately identify the students who need it? But I think where it ended up not going through was more administrative, which was the administration didn't want have the students to have, it would be an extra credit.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be an extra burden and an extra credit hour, and that didn't work. And so, it never went anywhere, even though I think it's still something that we need, but you're placing, it's both on the front end in terms of who takes this, and then on the logistical side, what faculty are going to teach it, and what happens to the students in terms of adding extra load to them. So the other thing that we looked at, we used to have a January term, and so we did have like a mid-year sort of get you up to speed, but then we moved it from a January to a May term, so that doesn't work anymore either. So we've done things, we've tried things, but I think like other people, still trying to figure it out.
Oh, yeah, it sounds like everyone's like really, everyone really cares about their students succeeding. So I guess that's the good thing. Just a few more, comments real fast. Ashley said, I think it's might be difficult to correlate preparedness on day one with success. And, I think that's true. They're coming in, they're pretty fresh and new, and, it's hard to know exactly what's going to happen. So, and some things about some summer courses and whether they're synchronous or asynchronous. If, there's a lot of ways to do this.
I apologize for jumping in. I had one question, if that's okay. Someone mentioned earlier, and maybe I misheard it, that they don't offer a 100 or a pre-chemistry course. They just offer general chemistry, but it sounded like it came in two flavors, a more intensive one and a less intensive one. Do they count towards the same regarding degree requirements? And can you delineate the differences between those two a little bit?
Yeah, sorry. I was the one who's mentioned that. And I just want to say, so when I meant intensive, sorry, that was not clear. It's more time in class, sorry. And so we have students take as assessment. They have to do a math prerequisite too, but then they take an assessment, and it includes like questions, but also includes kind of like, when's the last time we took chemistry, right? And then we put them in, they use the same book, the same overall content. It's just that one meets for 50% more than the usual course credit. And it works out that it doesn't affect their total credit, financial aid issues, and et cetera, if they take a normal load. And so that just allows us, that much more time in person to do practice problems and help the students and try to keep it capped smaller than our other Gen Chem. So that's what I meant by intensive. It's not intensively more work. It's intensive in terms of time in class and spending more time on these kind of working through problems and learning basics and stuff.
Okay, so both of them would,
and move
Sorry.
on. Yeah, after that, both classes, they can go back, both go into the same track.
No,
They're not-
I'm thinking about the credit hour component there. So
Yeah.
they both receive the same credit hours, just one has more seat time.
No, one's 6 credit hours, one's 4.
Okay, one is 4, one is 6, and then
Yeah,
you do the
50%
seat time
more.
based off that. Okay.
Yep.
Cool. Thank you.
All right, so I think what we'll do now is transition into a project that Sarah and I had been working on really for the last 5 years. And then we'll continue with our discussion. So I'm glad to hear that everybody is doing something for general chemistry students. I know that it's not really all that common for institutions to really take on this, this approach where we have some sort of intervention for students that maybe are underprepared when they come into college. And so when we started this adventure, we were noticing that our students had lower and lower pass rates in General Chemistry 1. And it wasn't until Sarah and I and our science learning specialist, Carol Fendrick at Benedictine University, really dug into the issue. You know, what do we do with students that are underprepared? And our initial thought was that maybe it's the math skills. And turns out that that's probably what was going on. But what we found out is that there's sort of a mix that needs to happen if you want to prepare students for general chemistry. And that mix we found, at least that worked for us, was that we have another course. And this course is a preparatory general chemistry course. And it's modeled after a 15-week semester, although it could be condensed into, the quarter system. But what we found is that every week, students need some sort of chemistry content, some sort of mathematical skill that's going to be appropriate for that chemistry in that particular week. And then every week is going to be some sort of focused academic skill. Things like reading a textbook, how to read a syllabus, note-taking, studying for an exams. We always assume that students come in with these sorts of skills, but it's not necessarily the case. And so when we were looking to develop this course, the first thing we wanted to know is there a textbook we can use? Because we all know that makes life a lot easier if there's some sort of curriculum you can follow. Turns out at the time there wasn't anything out there. And so we had to kind of make it up on our own. And through this project, we wrote a textbook. We wrote a textbook based on the curriculum that we do for this preparatory general chemistry course. And you can see right now we're in our 2nd edition. Oh, sorry. Okay. All right, so this is what we were seeing. So what I did was I went and looked at historical pass rates. And I focused on the fall because that was first semester, usually freshmen that populated this course. So all the students that came in that met the prereq, which is placement into, placement into above college algebra. So that was the only prerequisite we had on this course. We were seeing falling pass rates. So you can see in the fall 2010, we had about 70%, all the way to fall 2015, it fell to about 55%. And that's just in a 5-year time frame. What was going on? The instructors were primarily the same. We had a common syllabus, a common final. And if you do the statistical analyses across sections, there was really no difference in instructor, of course, across the years, across the sections. And so, what's going on? And so our hypothesis was that, well, maybe it's some sort of academic preparation. Maybe maybe students more and more were not ready for college. They didn't have the necessary quantitative literacy. Maybe they didn't have study skills. I mean, it's really important in college to have study skills. So we dug deep into this issue with historical data. All right, and so another issue we wanted to look at is, okay, so we know when students pass, and we know, and we can figure out if they graduate. So we looked at 3 years. We looked at 2010, 2011, and 2012. These were students that were enrolled in Gen Chem 1 for 3 years. Did they graduate from the institution? So combined rate for students that were successful in Gen Chem 1 was 73%. So that means that of all of those years, if they passed Gen Chem 1, 73% graduated from the institution. But if you look at the students that had a DF or W in Gen Chem 1 in those years, only 43% of those students graduated from the institution. And it was varied what happened. So either they left the institution, they changed their major, and for whatever reason, the graduation rate plummeted when they were not successful in Gen Chem 1. Okay, so this course now can be seen as a barrier to success. All right, so what we wanted to do is identify what that barrier was. And so the first thing we did was we looked at a nationally normed ACS exam called the Toledo exam. And we took all of our students in the fall 2016, and we gave them this Toledo placement exam. And what we found is that 44%, according to the Toledo exam, 44% of our students scored below the 50 percentile. And if you look at what the Toledo placement exam is supposed to identify, is that if students perform above the 50 percentile, that indicates an 80% success rate among first semester general chemistry. And so, and if you just look at this number, well, that sort of correlates with our DFW rate of 44%. So it was sort of kind of telling us that the preparedness was an issue. And so again, we dug a little deeper. Logistical concerns for the Toledo exam was definitely an issue. We had many meetings with biology, with admissions, and nobody wanted to give this exam. Okay, it's a huge burden for admissions to give additional placement exams. It's a burden on the students, burden on the families. So what we were looking for was a very simple metric that would identify students that may be unsuccessful in general chemistry. And we looked at lots of things, but what it came down to was the math ACT score for us. And we looked at the pass rates versus the math ACT score, and we had a pretty good linear correlation with that. No surprise to anybody here. But what we wanted to do is, okay, so let's use that maybe as a prerequisite to go into our normal general chemistry sequence. Because if you look at the say math ACT score of 23, the combined pass rate of all of those students is 74%, which is an order of what the Toledo could predict anyway without that logistical burden. You can really just look up the math ACT score, and 23, you're in, essentially. Another thing to note is that of all those students, 294 students fell below that pass rate, and they had an overall 32% pass rate of those students. So it really was a good predictor, at least of our group, of success in General Chemistry 1. All right, so what we did was we changed the prereq for our General Chemistry sequence. So before, the prereq was either credit in 110, which is college algebra, or placement into college trig, and 1 year of chemistry. What we changed that to is that they could just get into general chemistry by having a math ACT score of 23 or higher, or we have these other pathways. They could have credit in college algebra. They could prove proficiency on a math 110 or a college algebra exam, or they could opt to take the Toledo exam and score above a 50 percentile. So it's not like we're saying, no, you can't get into general chemistry if your math ACT is not so high. There were other avenues to get into general chemistry. All right, so what we did is in the fall 2016, we piloted this preparatory general chemistry course. So we started with 33 students. And the good thing about this course is if they decide not to stay in science, they still got Gen Ed science credit. So they got, it's not like 3 credits, gone away. They actually get Gen Ed credit for the course if they take it. What was also interesting was the demographic information from the survey. 50% of these students were first generation college students, which is double the amount in the College of Science alone. 77% of these students spoke another language at home with their family. And another thing that really was eye-opening to us is that of these students that were underprepared, 25% of them worked 10 hours or more per week. They had jobs outside of, and because they had to, support themselves and sometimes their families in order to go to school. And so these were students that were really dedicated, but they had so much external things going on that they did need that additional support. All right, so then we looked at the outcomes after these students went through preparatory general chemistry. And this is actually not just the pilot, but over time we added more of these prep Gen Chem courses in. So what we did was we looked at the numerical grade and compared that to math ACT score. You can still see that traditionally we have this linear correlation between their grade and their math ACT score. The dotted line represents this is what it takes to pass. And the blue is the prep gen students. So these are the prep general chemistry students that now take general chemistry 1. And you can see that all but one is above that passing threshold. So not only were they, they got through the preparatory general chemistry just fine, they were able to take general chemistry 1 and pass. And to me, that's a huge gap between the traditional students and the prep gen students. I mean, if you look at the lower ACT scores, there's a huge difference in the outcomes for those students. All right, if you take all of the information as a whole, we had 244 students in the traditional group and 47 in the Prep Gen Chem group, and you can look at their average scores, their differences, and their effect size. And so there was a large, and depending on the ACT, there was a larger effect size. So for instance, if you look at, ACT scores of 18, 19, and 20, in the traditional group, their pass rates were like 20, 34, and 45. So really low chances of success for those lower groups. But when they'd gone through the Prep Gen course, Prep Gen Chem course, they were able to pass Gen Chem 1. All right, and so how does that affect pass rates now that we have preparatory general chemistry? So now the pass rates are looking more like 80%, which is a lot better than what we'd seen before at 55%. And you may make the argument while you're taking all these students out that you had identified as underprepared, but I also taught the off-sequence General Chemistry 1 for many years, 3 or 4 years, where I would follow the Prep Gen Chem students, at least, in the background. And I only gave a DF or W to 2 students in that whole time that I taught the off-sequence Gen Chem 1. So, in a nutshell, this course was working for them at our institution. All right, so problems, so challenges we talked about in our earlier discussion is you have the data, all right, and you feel like that this is the way to go. Okay, so now you have to get buy-in from your stakeholders, and first and foremost, your stakeholders are going to be your students. And what students will say is, oh no, what if I fall behind on my curriculum? I'm a biology major and I want to make sure that I graduate in 4 years. Well, so what we did to kind of offset that argument is that we would offer off-sequence courses. So Gen Chem 1 would be taught in the spring and in the summer months so that they could catch up. And not lose track even with their colleagues. The chemistry department, well, they had lots of things to say. Their argument was, well, now we're decreasing standards. What about faculty time? And really, the only way to convince your chemistry colleagues is to show them the effectiveness with pass rates. Chemistry department does not want low pass rates. They want higher pass rates because really, and all of you know this, that when administration talks about retention, chemistry is often the target of which we're talking about retention. And College of Science, so we're talking about primarily biology majors that are taking these courses. We're adding credit hours. I mean, you guys talked about this in our discussion. Yes, we are adding credit hours. But again, the effectiveness, we believed, overrode that, that argument, because what happens is these students get into this endless loop of taking Gen Chem and then not passing and then retaking until they pass. And then not only that, but they hadn't learned the skills in order to succeed. So now they're taking Gen Chem 2 and they pass, and they might not pass that. And you can see how this endless loop of taking courses and not passing them can lead you to, drop out of college. And it's not a good start for first semester freshmen at all. Of course, we had to talk to the admissions and advisors. And, their issue was, how do we convince students to take this extra course? Will they fall behind? Well, in tracking the students that took preparatory general chemistry, and at first we only had data for the first to second year MELT, and we saw 88% retention among the first and second year of these prep general chemistry students at the university. So they didn't all stay in STEM, but they were still enrolled at the university. And for us, that was a huge win. All right, so again, with our project, it was Sarah and I that took on this preparatory general chemistry project, along with our science learning specialist at Benedictine University, and that's Carol Fendrick. So we all three participated in writing that textbook and running different aspects of the course. All right, so I'm going to stop yapping at everybody. And what we're going to do now is we're going to discuss. All right, so we talked about the challenges. We talked about what we've done. All right, so now what? What are we going to do? What are we going to do with this information? So I am going to share my
Should you
I'm gonna
need it?
share my screen and I'll let Sarah run the discussion again.
Great. Yeah, so that's what worked for us. That may not work for everybody, obviously, but you're kind of wondering, what are people thinking they're going to try, or is everyone just tired? And, what are the next steps? I don't know. Or what are you hoping to?
Did your prep course have a lab component?
It did not, no.
Because that's something in the past when we tried a prep course, we did have a lab component, and that just adds a lot of time to their schedule. So that was one of many things we had discussed in addition to some of the other things. So that's helpful to know that even without that, it's still, did you feel that they struggled in the lab and anymore when they switched over, or was that not really an issue?
I don't think we really looked into it too much, but we didn't notice that that was keeping them from graduating or progressing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would say that that's not something we specifically addressed, but it's also something we didn't notice when they took the Gen Chem 1 and Gen Chem 2 sequence. We didn't notice that the prep Gen Chem students were any lower in proficiency on lab skills than anybody else, but that is something we could dig into.
Kari, have you mapped what effects this has in other courses in your curriculum, like organic or upper level physical chemistry or something like that?
Actually, I'm glad you asked that question because I forgot to mention it. Yes, I followed these students all the way through from fall 2016 all the way until I left in 2019. And they succeeded in their other courses by and large. So if when they passed Gen Chem 1, I didn't see any not pass Gen Chem 2. And then when they went into organic, maybe a few fell off the radar at organic, but they were still passing their organic sequence too. So to me, that's a really impressive thing, because not only can you get them through general chemistry, but we are showing that you could also get them through their course sequence. And this translates not only to just chemistry, but to biology too, because part of the issue is not just chemistry. And in fact, if you teach a prep Gen Chem course and you just teach chemistry, it will not work. You need other things for preparedness, like math and the academic skills, I think was a secret sauce, really.
And they did some career, like trying to see what careers they might want to go into, and just sort of like all the things you need to like be motivated to continue on to.
I have a quick question. So does the textbook does that include the kind of other skills?
It does, yeah. So there's like a unit for each week of the semester, and there's 3 sections, and there's a math, a chemistry, and a academic skills. Cool. For each one, or at least for most of them.
It's sort of framed like a workbook, and so it's spiral bound, and students can tear out their homework. So it's not meant to be a textbook that stays on their bookshelf. It's meant to be a workbook where they work along in class or on their homework.
One other thing that was on the slide that we just didn't mention in too much detail was that this is also a learning community with a biology class. And so it was like mostly or all the same students, and they had some common assignments. And so it kind of built a cohort a little bit around that. So it was kind of a nice addition.
Yes, Sarah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I definitely saw that cohort community when I would teach the off-sequence Gen Chem 1. So not only were they working together in their learning community the first semester, but this kind of traveled with them as they progressed in their majors.
I don't know how other people deal with, like, if you have like chemistry majors or people who aren't ready to take Gen Chem yet, do you have classes or ways that you connect with those students before they maybe meet the math prereq? I mean, is there a way that you build a cohort from the first year?
We have a course actually, CHEO 99, which is a first year seminar. It's actually 0 credit. Every first year student has to take one of these on our campus. And it actually builds our cohort advising model. So we actually advise our students in cohorts too. But it also builds community because we do have students that are in algebra, so they can't take Gen Chem. And so, yeah, it allows them to meet the other chemistry majors ahead of time.
That's cool. We're trying to like kind of implement something like that at my school, and I don't know when we're starting, but yeah, I think we have a lot of those students that will catch will get sort of invested sooner.
When do you guys offer that prep course? Is it only in the fall, or do you have an off sequence of that too?
It's only in the fall.
Yeah.
There hadn't not enough students didn't pass the course to offer off sequence versions.
Okay.
So.
Anybody else have any like things they've tried that they're excited about? Or
I'm curious to if anybody's tried anything intervening during Gen Chem. So something that had been on a slide earlier was exam 1. And we've tried to kind of implement at least an advising thing where after exam 1, we contact all the students about and like, hey, here's your score was lower than I'm sure you'd hoped, and here's some resources, and like talk to your advisor, and here's tutors, and come talk to me about things, kind of thing. So we've implemented that, and trying to like reach out and contact students as soon as they have like the first big assessment. But even then, it's not like there's no formal or no required anything that we've done with that. That's all informal.
I do something similar also, like here's your wake up call, like we have several unit exams and you have the labs, you have everything else. So one bad exam is probably not going to sink you, but use it as this opportunity. One thing I started doing instead of, I used to kind of do like, what have you been doing that works and what doesn't work, and make it really open, like write a note to yourself for 2 minutes in class. Now what I have is basically a list of all the resources that they have, so that it's my way of saying, are you turning things in on time? And are you doing the graded homework? And are you, so they can go, are you going to the free tutors? So it's kind of like a reminder that they have these resources and a reflection on what they really should be doing if they are having a hard time. And I think that's actually, that's pretty good, because I keep on saying that all the time. Have you gone to the tutors? Have you come to my office hours, right? All these things, and they're not accessing them. So I was also going to say that our prep chem does have a lab. And as the person who gets the Gen Chem 1 students, I do feel like the prep chem does help them with maintaining a lab notebook, because we do that. So I kind of like that part, and maybe just decreases that barrier of like, oh my gosh, I'm in a lab and there's glassware. We have some rural students who really haven't been in a lab much. So, and we offer it like year round. So fall, spring, and summer, but I'm at a community college. So we often have students coming in off sequence. And then with having it have the lab, that means I think it counts towards our physical sciences gen ed. So if they do, again, decide to stop, then they've had their lab science. So it's kind of a bonus.
Benny, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so like Abby said, we've tried a formal review problem session, and it only works if those problem sets are aligned to what the instructor assesses on. So we just did general one department because that was the easiest to manage. But if all the instructors are writing their own exams, it was pretty much useless, and we saw nothing from it. However, if the faculty themselves do the review sets themselves that are similar to their exam problems, and then there's actually, I've seen a very big difference for that. In terms of what Kyle was saying about the exams, we actually implemented reflections on their exams. So they take exams. So it's kind of like what Britt was saying about, they really have to sit down and analyze what they've done. So we actually give them another copy of their exam before they get the results of their exam, and they do it as a take-home test. And then they have to analyze. They also get a copy of their bubble sheet that they filled in for their actual exam. And then they're supposed to really reflect on, did I get this question right, or did I get this wrong? And if they got it wrong, they have to write a reflection about why they got it wrong, what are some problems in the books that would have helped me get this problem right, and linking it to like goals and learning outcomes, just to make sure they know the question didn't come from nowhere. We told them we're going to ask you about, this limiting reagents, and here are 6 problems you could have done to do that. So it's really a personal self-reflection, and we found that students really love that. And they get points back. So, there's an artificial increase in the grades that has been successful, but the students really feel like they've learned quite a bit from that process. And now we're trying to assess the, longitudinal studies of students that went through this process, and seeing if we see improvements in their other outcomes in their other classes. So, right, Kyle, we need to do more assessments. And we also need to do more longitudinal assessments, because just because we fix it in Gen Chem 1 doesn't mean diddly squat in organic chemistry.
It's true. Yeah, that makes sense though. Like to, encourage them to put the time in these foundational courses, because this all keeps building on itself, right? And so you eke by on the first one, and the second one, Gen Chem 2 might hit you, and then if that doesn't, organic might. So building the skills is important, and self-assessment is so hard, I think, for everybody, but especially freshmen. Looked like several people do self-assessment type things.
All right, so I'll stop sharing. Yeah, so I think we had a really great discussion. It's interesting to talk to faculty about these things, because it all comes down to, we see very similar challenges, and we're all trying to really do similar things. And so it's really great to talk about things that have worked, and granted, what may have worked for Sarah and I might not work in your context, and we totally understand that. But hopefully we've given each other enough ideas to try, to keep trying to support those students, and so that we can see equitable outcomes.
I want to add too that we've had some of these discussions on our Discord server on Viper, and so of course, we'd love to hear your thoughts later, or if you want to chat with some more with Kari or Sarah about what they've done. Discord's a great place to do it. And so I'm going to throw the link to the Viper Discord channel in the chat right now, or the link to get to there if you're interested. We welcome everyone to come and continue the conversation there. I also have put in the chat a link to a very, very short survey that is useful for us to see what people think about SLiTHERs and future ideas for things. We always love to have interesting things you might think of that you want to come give a chat about, like Kari and Sarah are doing now. But I just wanted to mention those things before I totally forgot.
Does anybody have any last minute comments or questions or anything they want to add to the discussion?
I guess I am a little curious. The one time we did try to use a prep class and it covered some of the material from first quarter of general chemistry. They did really well on all of that, and then they utterly bombed everything that occurred after that point. So one of the things that's very different about your course is the inclusion of those academic skills, which I think is a nice idea. But I was curious if you saw any sort of fall off in terms of, you know, I'm going through first semester of general chemistry and this is all stuff I did in the prep class and I know that. And now it's something that's a brand new topic that I haven't thought of before. And did they suddenly realize that they had to actually study more? That was what some of our students said. So we tried so many different things, as everyone has. And so, I'm just curious if you observed any of that behavior.
Well, so prior to having a prep Gen Chem course, if they didn't meet the prerequisites to get into general chemistry, the prior prerequisites, we would usually put them into Introduction to Chemistry, which is a survey chemistry course. Which is just focused on chemistry content. And so the problem with that is that they don't really struggle with the chemistry content. They struggle with the math part of the chemistry content. They struggle with, how do I organize my time? How do I, how do I use my syllabus? Just things that we expect students to know, but they may not necessarily know. And so what was helpful was that we incorporated all of those three components into the Prep Gen Chem course. And we didn't really focus on only a certain content, a certain amount of content for chemistry content. And so not only did it help them in their Gen Chem 1, but it helped them in all of their courses. So they're still passing Gen Chem 2. They're still going into organic with these skills, even though it's completely different than Gen Chem. They use completely different types of skills in organic. They're still passing those courses. So I thought my idea is that it was, and we probably would need to dig into this deeper, is that those skills they learn in that course are translatable through their curriculum.
And did they seem, again, maybe this sounds overly negative, but did they seem excited about the academic skills components? I just feel like sometimes when we try to get them into that, they give us a lot of I know how to do school. Yep. And so I was just curious how you kind of combat that and get them to really acknowledge that they need some help.
Yeah, so we force it on them. They think it's dumb.
Okay, that's reassuring to hear. Yeah, thank you.
No, they don't love it. But they come back later and say, oh, I'm so glad you taught me how to fill out my calendar, my to-do list calendar, right? Or I'm so glad that you showed me how to think about so one of the components is metacognition. And, they'll come back and say, and this is always later, this is not during the class ever. They come back and say that those things help them. And so you're not going to get any students that are excited about learning those skills. They'd be weird if they were excited about it. But I think the more you push them into it, the more they'll realize that, yeah, it's definitely helpful.
I had a question. If a person was interested in reading more about these kinds of topics, what journals or places would you suggest reading from?
There's a lot of articles in JChem Ed, as you all know. Sarah and I had published a couple times, I guess, in Education Sciences. It's a MDPI journal. And of course, there's all sorts of, so it's educational research. So RSC.
CERP, yeah, CERP
Yes,
is there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I put the link to their paper in the chat, and you can also on Google Scholar forward search it and see what's cited it since then. And it's actually been cited a few times, so you can see what journals have cited, papers have cited that one, and then see what their paper says too. I also put the link, Anne had asked about the link to the book, and I put the link to the publisher. Again, it looks like it's, as she says, spiral bound, and it looks like it's $50 from the publisher.
Yeah, it's a workbook, so it's less expensive than a normal textbook, and again, it's not meant to be, housed on the shelf. It's meant to be worked through. So it's also not something you could return to a bookstore because they're going to work through it. And if you're interested in the textbook at all, just let me know. I can send you a copy. We have a second edition coming up real soon.
Cool. Thanks everyone for joining us.